India and Pakistan, two nations divided by decades of mistrust, their rivalry rooted in the violent partition of 1947. At the heart of their animosity lies Kashmir, a region scarred by wars, terrorism, and a cycle of violence that refuses to end. Both India and Pakistan possess nuclear weapons, making their conflict a global concern. In 2025, a terrorist attack pushes both nations to the brink, with the world fearing catastrophic escalation. On April 22, 2025, militants massacred 28 tourists in Kashmir's Bijbahara Valley, shattering peace and igniting outrage across India. The brutality of the attack united the nation in grief and fury, demanding swift justice. India launched Operation Sundar, striking 9 sites in Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, claiming to target militant bases. The government framed the action as self-defense, insisting it was necessary to prevent further bloodshed. Pakistan denied involvement, condemned India's strikes as aggression, and suspended the Simla Agreement. Retaliatory cross-border fire escalated tensions, bringing both nations dangerously close to war.
Check 1, check 2, check.
International pressure led to a fragile ceasefire, but mistrust lingered beneath the surface. The world watched anxiously, uncertain if peace would hold or collapse into renewed conflict. An uneasy calm settled over the border, with both armies on high alert and the threat of war ever present. Diplomatic efforts struggled against deep-seated animosity and the ghosts of past conflicts. Kashmir remains the epicenter of India-Pakistan tensions, its people trapped in a cycle of violence and uncertainty. The heavily militarized line of control stands as a stark symbol of unresolved grievances. Partition's legacy of violence and displacement haunts both nations, fueling wars, terrorist attacks, and enduring suspicion. Decades of conflict have left deep scars, with each crisis threatening to spiral out of control. Nuclear weapons cast a constant shadow over the subcontinent, raising the stakes of every confrontation. The 2025 crisis exposed just how close India and Pakistan can come to catastrophe, with the world holding its breath. In the immediate aftermath of the Bijbahara Valley attack, a different kind of battle commenced, a war of words, accusations, and counter-accusations. Both India and Pakistan launched investigations, each seeking to control the narrative, to pin the blame on the other, and to rally international support for their respective positions. India, reeling from the shock and grief of the massacre, wasted no time in pointing fingers at Pakistan. Indian investigators claim to have uncovered irrefutable evidence linking the attackers to Lashkar-e-Taiba, a Pakistan-based militant group with a long history of targeting India. This claim was bolstered by the attackers' weapons and tactics, which bore striking similarities to previous Lashkar-e-Taiba operations. The Indian government, its voice a mix of fury and sorrow, accused Pakistan of harboring terrorists and providing them with safe haven to plan and execute attacks on Indian soil. Pakistan, for its part, vehemently denied any involvement in the attack, dismissing India's accusations as baseless and politically motivated. Pakistani officials pointed to the attackers' alleged Kashmiri identities and their stated motives of resisting Indian rule in the disputed region. They accused India of exploiting the tragedy to further its own agenda in Kashmir, to demonize Pakistan on the international stage, and to justify its own oppressive policies in the region. The war of words extended beyond the corridors of power, spilling onto the streets and into the homes of ordinary citizens. In India, the attack sparked outrage and calls for swift retribution, with many demanding that the government take decisive action against Pakistan. In Pakistan, the mood was a mix of defiance and apprehension, with many fearing an Indian military response and bracing themselves for another chapter in the long and bloody conflict with their neighbor. Beyond the war of words, the diplomatic fallout of the Bijbahara Valley attack was swift and far-reaching. Both India and Pakistan, their relationship already strained to the breaking point, engaged in a series of retaliatory measures, each action fueling the cycle of mistrust and pushing the two nuclear-armed neighbors closer to the brink. India, determined to punish Pakistan for its alleged role in the attack, unleashed a flurry of diplomatic and economic sanctions. Indian diplomats fanned out across the globe, lobbying for international condemnation of Pakistan's actions and seeking to isolate the country on the world stage. Visas for Pakistani nationals were revoked, cultural exchanges were cancelled, and trade relations were severed, sending a clear message that India was prepared to inflict pain on its neighbor. Pakistan, refusing to be cowed by Indian pressure, responded in kind, mirroring India's actions with a series of countermeasures. Pakistani diplomats were recalled from New Delhi, Indian diplomats were expelled from Islamabad, and visa restrictions were imposed on Indian citizens. The already limited channels of communication between the two countries were shut down, replaced by a deafening silence that spoke volumes about the depth of mistrust and animosity that had come to define their relationship. The diplomatic standoff had a ripple effect across the region, sending shockwaves through international organizations and prompting concerned calls for restraint from world leaders. The United Nations, already grappling with multiple crises around the globe, found itself once again thrust into the role of mediator, urging both India and Pakistan to step back from the brink and engage in dialogue to prevent a catastrophic escalation of the conflict. In a move that sent shockwaves through the international community and raised fears of a humanitarian crisis, India announced the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, a landmark agreement that had governed the sharing of water resources between the two countries for over 6 decades. The treaty, brokered by the World Bank in 1960, had long been hailed as a model of transboundary water cooperation, surviving multiple wars and periods of heightened tension. India's decision to suspend the treaty, widely seen as a drastic escalation of the conflict, was met with outrage and condemnation from Pakistan. The Indus River and its tributaries, originating in India but flowing through Pakistan, are a lifeline for the country's agricultural sector, providing water for irrigation and sustaining the livelihoods of millions of farmers. Cutting off this vital water supply, Pakistani officials warned, would have devastating consequences for the country's food security and could plunge millions into poverty and hunger. India defended its decision, arguing that it was well within its rights as an upper riparian state to suspend the treaty in light of Pakistan's alleged support for terrorism. Indian officials insisted that the suspension was a temporary measure, a way of sending a strong message to Pakistan and compelling it to crack down on militant groups operating from its soil. They maintained that India would resume its obligations under the treaty once Pakistan took concrete steps to address India's security concerns. Pakistan, however, dismissed India's assurances as disingenuous, accusing its neighbor of weaponizing water resources for political gain. The suspension of the treaty, Pakistani officials warned, would have far-reaching consequences, not only for the people of Pakistan, but for the fragile peace and stability of the entire region. As tensions between India and Pakistan spiraled, military analysts and, armchair generals alike turned their attention to the balance of power on the subcontinent. On paper, India, with its larger economy, sprawling industrial base and vast manpower reserves, held a decisive advantage. Its armed forces, boasting over 1.4 million active-duty personnel and a formidable arsenal of advanced weaponry, really dwarfed Pakistan's military in both size and firepower. India's military dominance extended beyond just mere numbers. Years of sustained investment in modernization had transformed the Indian armed forces into a formidable fighting machine, capable of projecting power across multiple domains. Its air force, equipped with a mix of Russian-made Sukhoi fighters, French-made Rafale jets, and indigenously developed Tejas aircraft, enjoyed a qualitative edge over its Pakistani counterpart. On the ground, India's tank formations, spearheaded by Russian-built T-90s and indigenously produced Arjun tanks, possessed a firepower advantage that Pakistan would definitely struggle to match. Pakistan, however, was far from defenseless. While its military was smaller in size and, honestly, lacked the technological sophistication of its Indian rival, it was a battle-hardened force with a proven track record of resilience and determination. Pakistan's armed forces, steeled by years of fighting insurgents along its western border and locked in a perpetual state of vigilance against its larger neighbor, were no strangers to conflict. Moreover, Pakistan had made significant strides in recent years in bolstering its military capabilities, particularly in the realm of missile technology. Its arsenal of ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, many of them developed with Chinese assistance, provided Pakistan with a credible deterrent capability, a way of inflicting unacceptable damage on India in the event of a full-scale war. Beyond the cold calculations of military hardware and strategic doctrines lay a more intangible but equally crucial factor in the escalating crisis: public opinion. In both India and Pakistan, the Bibihara Valley massacre had ignited a firestorm of anger and outrage, fueling nationalist sentiments and putting immense pressure on the respective governments to respond with strength and resolve. In India, where the attack had struck a raw nerve, particularly among the Hindu majority, the public mood was one of righteous indignation. Social media platforms were flooded with calls for revenge, with many demanding that the government abandon its policy of strategic restraint and unleash the full might of the Indian military against Pakistan. The Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP, riding a wave of Hindu nationalism, faced growing pressure from its support base to take decisive action, to avenge the deaths of the innocent and teach Pakistan a lesson it would not forget. In Pakistan, public opinion was equally polarized. While the government vehemently denied any involvement in the attack, many ordinary Pakistanis rallied around the flag, expressing defiance in the face of Indian pressure and vowing to stand firm against what they perceived as Indian aggression. The memory of past conflicts, of Indian military actions in East Pakistan and Kashmir, fueled a deep-seated mistrust of India and a belief that Pakistan was once again being unfairly targeted. The volatile mix of public pressure, nationalist fervor, and political expediency created a dangerous dynamic, limiting the space for diplomacy and increasing the risk of miscalculation. Both Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Khan found themselves caught between the need to appease their domestic audiences and the imperative to avoid a catastrophic escalation of the conflict. Looming large over the India-Pakistan crisis was the shadow of China, a rising superpower with its own strategic interests in the region. China's close ties with Pakistan, forged over decades of military cooperation and economic partnership, added a complex geopolitical dimension to the conflict, raising the specter of a wider regional conflagration. For Pakistan, China represented a crucial ally, a counterweight to India's military might, and a source of diplomatic support on the international stage. China's economic and military assistance had been instrumental in bolstering Pakistan's capabilities, particularly in the realm of conventional and nuclear weaponry. In the event of a full-blown war with India, Pakistan would undoubtedly look to China for political backing, military aid, and potentially even direct intervention. India, acutely aware of the China-Pakistan nexus, viewed China's growing influence in the region with a mixture of apprehension and suspicion. The unresolved border dispute between India and China, a legacy of their 1962 war, remained a point of contention, requiring India to maintain a significant military presence along its northern frontier. The possibility of China exploiting an India-Pakistan conflict to advance its own interests in the Himalayas was a nightmare scenario that Indian strategists were keen to avoid. The China factor injected an element of unpredictability into the crisis, raising the stakes for all involved. Any escalation of the conflict between India and Pakistan had the potential to draw in China, transforming a regional dispute into a wider confrontation with, global implications. Fueling the tensions between India and Pakistan was a relentless arms race, a seemingly endless cycle of military modernization and weapons acquisition that had consumed vast resources and heightened insecurity on both sides. Driven by historical rivalry, strategic mistrust, and domestic political imperatives, both countries had embarked on ambitious programs to enhance their military capabilities, with each new acquisition fueling suspicion and prompting a countermove from the other side. India, with its larger economy and access to advanced technologies from countries like Russia, France, Israel, and the United States, had been able to maintain a qualitative edge in many areas. Its recent acquisitions of Rafale fighter jets, S-400 air defense systems, and Apache attack helicopters had significantly bolstered its military capabilities, widening the gap with Pakistan. Pakistan, determined to keep pace with its larger neighbor, had relied heavily on China for its military hardware. Chinese-made fighter jets, tanks, missiles, and submarines formed the backbone of Pakistan's arsenal, providing it with a credible deterrent against Indian military power. Pakistan had also invested heavily in developing its own indigenous defense industry, striving to reduce its reliance on foreign suppliers and enhance its self-sufficiency in critical areas. The arms race, while driven by a desire for security, had paradoxically made both countries less safe. The constant influx of new weapons systems, coupled with the lack of transparency surrounding their capabilities and doctrines, had increased the risk of miscalculation, accident, and unintended escalation. The specter of a conventional conflict spiraling into a nuclear exchange, once unthinkable, had become a chilling possibility. As the India-Pakistan crisis escalated, casting a long shadow over global affairs, one terrifying question lingered in the minds of world leaders and ordinary citizens alike. Could this volatile standoff between two nuclear-armed neighbors spiral into the unthinkable, a nuclear war? The very notion, once confined to the realm of Cold War paranoia and dystopian fiction, had acquired a chilling plausibility, a stark reminder of the fragility of peace in the 21st century. Both India and Pakistan, driven by a potent mix of historical grievances, strategic mistrust, and domestic political pressures, possessed nuclear arsenals capable of inflicting unimaginable death and destruction. India, which had first tested nuclear weapons in 1974, maintained a no-first-use policy, pledging to only use its nuclear arsenal in retaliation to a nuclear attack. Pakistan, which had conducted its first nuclear tests in 1998, refused to adopt such a policy, maintaining a posture of calculated ambiguity regarding the circumstances under which it might resort to nuclear weapons. This asymmetry in nuclear doctrines, coupled with the lack of transparency surrounding both countries' command and control structures, created a dangerous level of uncertainty, increasing the risk of miscalculation or accident. In the fog of war, with tensions running high and communication channels disrupted, a false alarm, a misinterpretation of intelligence, or an unauthorized launch could trigger a chain of events with catastrophic consequences. The international community, acutely aware of the stakes involved, watched with bated breath, urging both sides to exercise restraint and to step back from the brink. The specter of a nuclear conflict between India and Pakistan, once a distant nightmare, had become an all too real possibility, a chilling reminder of the fragility of peace in the nuclear age. The potential consequences of a nuclear war between India and Pakistan were too horrific to contemplate, a nightmarish scenario that defied comprehension. Yet, in the face of such a grave threat, it was imperative to confront the unthinkable, to grasp the sheer scale of devastation that such a conflict would unleash, not only on the Indian subcontinent but on the entire world. A 2019 study published in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, a prestigious scientific journal, had attempted to model the potential impact of a limited nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan, a chilling thought experiment that yielded sobering results. The study's authors, drawing on historical data and sophisticated computer simulations and the latest scientific understanding of nuclear weapons effects, painted a grim picture of a world transformed by nuclear fire. According to the study's projections, even a limited nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan would result in an immediate death toll of 50 to 125 million people, depending on the size of the weapons used and the targets chosen. Major cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Karachi, and Lahore, home to tens of millions of people, would be reduced to radioactive rubble, their inhabitants incinerated in an instant. The horrors, however, would not end there. The initial blast would ignite massive firestorms, releasing millions of tons of soot and smoke into the atmosphere. This black cloud would encircle the globe, blocking sunlight and plunging the planet into a nuclear winter. Global temperatures would plummet, agricultural production would collapse, and billions of people would face starvation and disease. The long-term consequences, in terms of human suffering, environmental devastation, and economic collapse, would be almost impossible to calculate. The ramifications of a nuclear conflict between India and Pakistan would extend far beyond the borders of those two nations, sending shockwaves across the globe and reshaping the geopolitical landscape for generations to come. The world, already grappling with the challenges of climate change, pandemics, and economic instability, would be plunged into a new era of uncertainty and fear. The immediate impact would be felt most acutely in South Asia, where neighboring countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka would be inundated with refugees fleeing the radioactive fallout and economic collapse. The region, already struggling with poverty, overpopulation, and political instability, would be pushed to the brink of chaos. Further afield, the economic consequences would be devastating. Global trade would grind to a halt as fear and uncertainty gripped financial markets. The interconnectedness of the global economy meant that no nation would be immune to the fallout, with even the most powerful economies facing recession or depression. The political fallout would be equally profound. The use of nuclear weapons, shattering a taboo that had held for over 7 decades, would usher in a new era of nuclear proliferation. Countries around the world, fearing for their own security in a more dangerous world, might feel compelled to acquire nuclear weapons, further increasing the risk of nuclear terrorism or accidental use. The international system, already strained by great power competition and rising nationalism, would be tested to its limits. The United Nations, already struggling to maintain peace and security in a multipolar world, would face an unprecedented challenge, its credibility and legitimacy on the line. The world, in the aftermath of a nuclear conflict between India and Pakistan, would be a fundamentally different place. A darker, more dangerous, and more uncertain world. The human cost in terms of lives lost, dreams shattered, and potential extinguished would be immeasurable. It was a future that humanity could not afford to contemplate, a stark reminder of the urgent need to find a path to peace on the Indian subcontinent and to rid the world of the scourge of nuclear weapons. The world watches and waits, holding its breath as the India-Pakistan standoff continues. The ceasefire, while offering a fragile respite from the brink of war, does little to alleviate the underlying tensions and deep-seated mistrust that have plagued these two nuclear-armed neighbors for decades. The threat of renewed conflict, of a miscalculation or an unforeseen incident shattering the uneasy peace, hangs heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the precariousness of the situation. The Bibihara Valley Massacre, a horrific act of violence targeting innocent civilians, has exposed the raw nerves of a long and bloody conflict, pushing India and Pakistan dangerously close to the precipice. The diplomatic fallout, marked by retaliatory measures, accusations, and counter-accusations, has further deepened the divide, leaving little room for dialogue or reconciliation. The suspension of key agreements, the specter of water wars, and the ever-present threat of nuclear escalation have raised the stakes to unprecedented levels. The world holds its breath, hoping against hope that cooler heads will prevail, that diplomacy will triumph over violence, and that a path to peace can be found amidst the ruins of broken promises and shattered dreams. But the road ahead is fraught with peril, a treacherous path littered with the wreckage of past conflicts and the looming shadow of nuclear annihilation. The world watches and waits, praying for peace, but bracing for the worst. The fate of millions, perhaps billions, hangs in the balance, a stark reminder of the fragility of human civilization and the ever-present threat posed by the weapons of our own destruction. The time for wisdom, for courage, for leadership is now. The future of humanity may very well depend on it.